Am I wrong?
It's unbelievable.
I want to just read. This is from chapter 46. Brad Thor has a new book called Full Black. Up until TIP, Nicholas said, the gold standard in intelligence software belonged to the United States. The American company called Inslaw Manufacturing manufactured the premier collection case management and analysis system called PROMIS, Prosecutors Management Information System. Now, look this up. You won't find very much on the Internet, but it's true. It was a precursor to TIP, the new operating system, and it operated 24/7 looking for the nexuses and correlations between people, places, and organizations. It's brilliantly adept at accessing proprietary corporate databases like those of banks, credit card companies, electric, water, and gas utilities. Running algorithms, it built amazing relationship trees outlining exactly who knows and who interacts with the subject. For example, if you're subject of an investigation and you started using more water or electricity, it would suspect that you had people staying with you. It would then search through all of your phone records and emails looking for your contacts that had suddenly stopped or reduced their usage of specific utilities and suggest that they might be the ones at your house. This would be backed up with credit card transactions showing train or plane ticket purchases, gasoline, etc. PROMIS would then focus on these people and pull up all of their records, searching for any criminal history, mentions of them in previous investigations, and any and all hints of a conspiracy that might exist between you and what might actually entail. It was like the Terminator. It never slept, it never stopped, and the U.S. was all too happy to share this software with its allied intelligence partners. This technology is old. Wait until you hear the new technology. We have Brad Thor to, back this up from his book Full Black. Brad, PROMIS is real.
PROMIS is 100% real.
Developed in the 1970s originally to help prosecutors.
Yes, the idea is that they wanted to be able to spin a case file, spin in the literal sense, not in the figurative, no spin zone kind of a thing. What they wanted to be able to do was look at a file based upon who the arresting officer was, the prisoner was, the judge was, and what they used it for originally was to say, okay, let's look at the defense lawyer here. Let's look at all the defense lawyer's cases. How often does he cave in and take a plea bargain? At what point in the process does he? How minimal of an offer has to be offered before the defense lawyer takes a plea for his client? Very, very interesting. Then the intelligence agencies got a hold of it, and that's when this thing started getting freaky.
Okay. So tell me how this is used before you even get into tips. Is it still being used? And then tell me what tips is.
Yeah, it is still being used. What happened is, and we won't get into the weeds about the original intent of the people who built this thing was to use it just to help the court system be more efficient. And then the intelligence agencies said, this thing is amazing and it's being underutilized. We can just do some incredible things. They took it and started tweaking it, and that's what ticked off the original software manufacturers. They didn't want it to be used for that kind of thing, especially without paying them. What ended up happening was the intel agency said, oh, if this can track people in the court system, it can track people in real life. And so they taught this thing how to hack into all these different databases to start getting more information than just who's the defense attorney, who's the arresting officer. That's where you get into credit card purchases and all this kind of stuff. What ended up happening was it got offered to some of our allies with a convenient trap door built into it so that if allied intelligence agencies started using it, our intel guys could see what they were doing with it. And one of the copies ended up getting out there on the black market. So people that we didn't want to have the PROMIS program got it. And one particular example is the intel guys in South Africa during the apartheid days. And they used it to track and kill dissidents. As a matter of fact, a lot of other governments realized, wait a second, this is fantastic. If we've only got a physical description of a dissident we're looking for, we can put that into the PROMIS system, and we can get hits when anybody crosses a border who matches that, or anybody shows up at a bus station in a tiny town in our country.
Explain how it was used in South Africa to kill dissidents. What do you mean?
Well, I give you a specific example. The South Africans had a rumor that there was an impending miners' strike, and that it was going to be a crippling strike for the country. And they had only a little bit of information. They knew maybe one or two people who were involved, supposedly that were going to be involved with the strike, but they didn't know for sure. So they loaded those two people into the system. They put everything they could find about these two people into the system, and then let the system, like I said, it's like the Terminator, it never sleeps, start building data, start looking at the history of these people. The thing is, you don't leave a digital footprint in the world anymore. You leave a digital shadow. It tells the government where you are right now, not where you've been. They're not playing catch up. They know exactly where you're standing in relation to the sun, if you will. So what they did is they figured out who two people lightly associated with this miners' strike were, and they went, just based on that information, Promise found all the organizers of the strike. They disappeared. They never were seen again. The strike did not happen.
Wow. What do you say to people, Brad, who say,
well, I'm not doing anything wrong, and neither are any of my friends. Why should I worry about them knowing what I'm doing?
Because, Pat, there's going to come a time where it doesn't matter if you're doing anything wrong. All it's going to matter is you don't stand in the proper place as far as the government's concerned. Listen, you guys know me. I've been on all the time with you. I am the biggest pro-military, pro-law enforcement guy. But there's a lot of stuff happening that, I don't want the government being able to look at my list of library books under the Patriot Act.
How do you find out about this stuff? Can you say?
I've got people, listen, there are good people out there in the intelligence community who don't like this stuff.
Yeah, they're spooked. I talk to people, I don't have the kind of contacts you do, but I've talked to people who are in the intelligence community and in the military and everything else that are spooked as hell by some of the stuff that, you continue going down the road that we're going down, and this is very dangerous stuff. Now, that is the old technology of Promise. Now, when we come back, Brad will tell you about the new technology of TIPS and what he knows about that.
Okay, so Promise, as I've said, was like the Terminator. And if Promise is the Terminator, then TIPS is Skynet, the artificial intelligence force behind the Terminator, directing the Terminator, telling it what to do. So what ended up happening was, since we built a back door that allow us to spy on anybody who took Promise into their intel agency, any of our allied partners, there was a company. I had to change it in the book, Glenn. It is not called TIP, Total Intelligence Paradigm. One of my guys who led me to this thing and laid it out for me, when he read the book, he said, you can't put this in there. He said, it will track right back to me. You got to call it something else. So I changed the name. Anyway, what TIPS is, what it's based on, is a real software system where they took the Promise system and gave it a brain. They gave it artificial intelligence so that this thing could not only hunt for data, it could anticipate. If there was information about an attack that the government was afraid was going to happen, this thing would start going through its citizenry, trying to figure out which of the citizens were best equipped and most likely to commit whatever crime it is that the government or the intel agency thought was going to be committed.
We're down to Minority Report.
That's exactly what it is. I was told by one of my sources that they actually had a successful apprehension of a subject using this new software, and that the government in question, who had sponsored the building of this software, it's not ours, it is in the Western world, was giddy beyond belief that now all they needed to do was somebody to whisper during an interrogation that something might be about to happen, and they set this thing loose on its own populace. It's terrifying.
Brad, I talked to some people at Google who are quite frankly afraid of Google. Google is a fine company. It's done a lot of great things. It's a great search. That's the only search engine that really works. But if you read in the in the Plex?
In the Plex.
Yeah, if you read that and you read it with a mind of the future, if you've ever read any Ray Kurzweil, The Age of Spiritual Machines is one that everybody should read. If you've ever read any Ray Kurzweil, who is a futurist, who is works for Google and Microsoft and everything else, and then you read in the Plex, they're creating artificial intelligence, and they're with our government.
Glenn, I will even take you in another direction on the same thing. I would say that if you're recommending that people read those two books, they also need to read Search and Destroy, which is a real scathing expose of Google. Search and Destroy, great book. Listen, when we talk about tips, the thing that's frightening here is that Google has partnered up with the NSA, and what they're trying to do is create their own Skynet, and what they're using is the millions of searches on Google every day. How you search, what you ask a question. When you go to that Google search toolbar and you punch in your question for what you're looking on the net, that is teaching this artificial intelligence thing that Google is building how to think. They're trying to teach this artificial brain how to think like people. And I got to tell you, Google's done some great things, but I have a real problem with a company whose motto is "Don't be evil," but their mascot is a T-Rex.
I have a real problem with any company that is in bed with the United States government.
Absolutely.
There's no. I'm sorry. Private companies are private companies. When you're in bed with the United States government as tightly as Google is, and you're doing things as spooky as Google. I mean, there's a reason why Google is getting kicked out or coming under economic fire in almost every country in the world. I mean, all these companies are saying, all these countries are saying, hey, this goes against civil rights. This goes against privacy. You can't do these things. Here's our country is sending that stuff over to other countries. It's frightening stuff.
It's not only frightening, Glenn, but there's one step in this whole, when we talk about the promise system.
Hold on, because we'll get to that here in just a second. And what do you say to people who say, oh, it's no big deal? That next. You have that conversation with them. The name of the book is Full Black by Brad Thor. Okay, so Brad, in the book,
yes,
we were talking about Promise and Tips, which is not the real name, but Promise you can look up, and you don't find very much on Promise. These are software systems. You say Promise is the Terminator, and Tips is Skynet.
Correct.
And
then we've got what. And here's the link for anybody who says, you know what? I can't believe this. I can't believe this. There is a. So we all know J. Edgar Hoover kept all his files, right?
Yes.
Had files on everybody. You think the government stopped doing that? You think there is something, and this is one of the reasons why the government is pushing through so hard with this deal with Google. From what my people have said, there is something that the government develops called Main Core. And what Main Core is it's a database of over 8 million Americans that the government believes could be a threat to its existence, to national security. And this is full profiles on over 8 million Americans that exist in this database with all of that backup data that was garnered through Promise.
Do you think I'm in that backup database?
Pardon me?
Do you think I'm in that database?
Yeah, and thankfully I'm on the I'm hanging up a piece of fruit on your relationship tree, and I'm probably in it as well now. Low-hanging fruit.
8 million Americans are in this database.
Yeah, called Main Core. And the idea behind this database is that in a time of national emergency, you can see on the radio, I'm holding my fingers up, making the quotation marks. In a time of a crisis, which you wouldn't want to ever let go to waste, these people could then be grabbed. We would know where they are. We would know what the case is we want to make against them, because in a time of national emergency or crisis, they could be a threat to the government. So therefore, let's go grab them. Let's hold on to them. Let's detain them.
May I just say, Brad,
yes.
This ties into something that was never addressed fully. There were questions asked about it. They verified it, and then they moved on. The press was fine with it. And it was if I'm not mistaken, this is about a year and a half ago, an executive order, I believe, and it went to I can't remember all the details. Stu, look this up. But remember, there was an executive order, I think, that was pushed through where the president said that there's a list of people that can be terminated, if you will, that are a threat both in and out of the United States. And the only one they used by name was that guy in Yemen, the American citizen. But these were American citizens.
Oh, yeah, it was the
assassination order.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The al-Awlaki. And, you know, this is what's very interesting, is that under President Bush, he signed a presidential directive stating that we were in a national emergency. And Obama re-signed it, re-upped it. This thing has been around for, we're going on 10 years now. This is there's a lot of these presidential directives and stuff that the mainstream media just isn't interested in, or for some reason just won't pursue. So there's a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
Hey, listen,
So,
I'm not.
Brad, take answer, because there are people that are listening right now who say, and quite honestly, if I refuse to look at the future, Ben Sherwood Ben Sherwood, I think, is the president of ABC News. Now, at least he is. He wrote this great book called The Survivors Club. And the survivors, he went and he looked at all the different survivors, from wars to disasters to big and small. And what did they all have in common? And one of the things that they all had in common was they were willing to look outside of the box. They were willing to say, you know what, this plane could catch on fire. You know what, I could slip and fall. This could happen. And so they looked outside the box and saw the realm of possibilities. And they didn't live their life in a paranoid way. They just looked at the realm of possibilities and saw these things could happen. I'm not saying they are happening. They could. And they're becoming more and more realistic every day. How do you say this, or how do you answer to the people who say, this is ridiculous, this is America, it will never happen here?
Well, it is happening. I mean, you only have to look outside. There's so many different examples, Glenn, of the government. But at the very basic level of this is that when you give up any of your liberty, you will never see it again. So this can go into many different areas. It can be gun ownership. We want you to have all of your guns registered. And then we just have an example in Illinois where the state attorney in Illinois was suing the state police. This is how bad our government has gotten when the government branches of the government sue each other. The state attorney in Illinois, Lisa Madigan, was suing the Illinois State Police because the Illinois State Police would not turn over the database of who owns a firearms owner identification card. And the scuttlebutt was they believed the state attorney general was going to use that database and balance against her database of who has registered firearms to say, okay, who has a firearm owner's card but no firearms? This is the kind of stuff that is going on in the world, where you don't have to commit a crime or you don't have to be sticking up a bank, but they're trying. Listen, there's so many regulations, so many stupid laws. Everybody is guilty of something, and they are now starting to hone in, narrow in, and just nail every single person they can find out there.
It's never really fun talking to you, Brad. I never leave more optimistic after a conversation with Brad Thor. One last question.
Yes.
I have been feeling for a while that unplug. Now, I'm in the internet, radio, television, communications business. How does someone unplug in today's world? How do you not become part of Skynet?
Well, you first have to come to realization that this quaint image of you leave a digital footprint is not true. It's like I said, you leave a digital shadow, which means if they know the position of the sun, they know where you're standing. There's a lot of good information out there. Glenn, and I appreciate how much you've said about full black. I think if people read Search and Destroy about Google, they get a great idea about if you have a Gmail account or anything like that, what Google is able to do with your Gmail. It is a learning process like anything else where people have to do their own homework. Yeah, if you've got the GPS enabled on your phone, well, guess what? That tells people where you are every single moment of the day. And you don't have to be someone who intends to commit a crime. It's something that is innocuous and normal and acceptable at some point could get turned into a crime. I mean, we're racing in that direction.
Is there any doubt in your mind that if this technology existed in the 1930s, there wouldn't be a Jew or in 1946, a Jew or a homosexual or someone who stood a gypsy? There wouldn't be one alive, would there?
Glenn, this is what scares me, is with all the research I did for Full Black, to read these stories after stories about dissidents that were hunted and killed using a software program to help locate them. I thought, you know what? The history of mankind is tyranny. We are an exception, and they're unraveling a little bit here. I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow, but the possibility is there if we don't stand fast and fight back against this.
Brad Thor, the name of the book is Full Black. Can't recommend it highly enough. Thank you very much, Brad. We'll talk again.
GBTV. The truth lives here.
It's brilliantly adept at accessing proprietary corporate databases like those of banks, credit card companies, electric, water, and gas utilities. Running algorithms, it built amazing relationship trees outlining exactly who knows and who interacts with the subject. For example, if you're subject of an investigation and you started using more water or electricity, it would suspect that you had people staying with you. It would then search through all of your phone records and emails looking for your contacts that had suddenly stopped or reduced their usage of specific
lawyer here. Let's look at all the defense lawyers' cases. How often does he cave in and take a plea bargain? At what point in the process does he? How minimal of an offer has to be offered before the defense lawyer takes a plea for his client? Very, very interesting. Then the intelligence agencies got a hold of it, and that's when this thing started getting freaky.
Okay. So tell me how this is used before you even get into tips. Is it still being used? And then tell me what tips is.
Yeah, it is still being used. What happened is, and we won't get into the weeds about the original intent of the people.
Am I wrong?
It's unbelievable.
I want to just read, this is from chapter 46. Brad Thor has a new book called Full Black. Up until TIP, Nicholas said, the gold standard in intelligence software belonged to the United States. The American company called Inslaw Manufacturing manufactured the premier collection case management and analysis system called PROMIS, Prosecutors Management Information System. Now, look this up. You won't find very much on the internet, but it's true. It was a precursor to TIP, the new operating system, and it operated 24/7 looking for the nexuses and correlations between people, places, and organizations. Wait until you hear the new technology. We have Brad Thor to back this up from his book Full Black. Brad, PROMIS is real.
PROMIS is 100% real.
Developed in the 1970s originally to help prosecutors.
Yes, the idea is that they wanted to be able to spin a case file, spin in the literal sense, not in the figurative, no spin zone kind of a thing. What they wanted to be able to do was look at a file based upon who the arresting officer was, the prisoner was, the judge was, and what they used it for originally was to say, okay, let's look at the defense
utilities and suggest that they might be the ones at your house. This would be backed up with credit card transactions showing train or plane ticket purchases, gasoline, etc. PROMIS would then focus on these people and pull up all of their records, searching for any criminal history, mentions of them in previous investigations, and any and all hints of a conspiracy that might exist between you and what might actually entail. It was like the Terminator. It never slept, it never stopped, and the U.S. was all too happy to share this software with its allied intelligence partners. This technology is old.